The town of Oak Creek, Virginia, was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. It was a patriotic town, sitting just 10 miles outside one of the largest naval special warfare bases on the East Coast. The American flag flew on every porch, and the locals treated the men in uniform like royalty. In the heart of the town sat Betty's Home Cooking, a diner that smelled of bacon grease, fresh coffee, and apple pie. This was Sarah Vance's world. Sarah was 55 years old, though her eyes looked 1,000 years older. She was a woman of few words. She wore her graying hair pulled back in a tight, sensible bun. Her uniform was always pressed, her apron spotless. But the locals noticed two things about Sarah. She had a deep, jagged scar running down the side of her neck, usually hidden by a high collar, and she walked with a heavy limp in her left leg. To the young soldiers who frequented the diner, Sarah was just the slow lady. They didn't know her history. They didn't ask. It was a rainy Tuesday when Lieutenant Brad Miller walked in. Miller was young, handsome, and incredibly arrogant. He had just completed his SEAL qualification training and wore his trident like a crown. He was loud, boisterous, and eager to show off to the 3 other junior officers with him. "Hey, sweetheart," Miller shouted across the diner, snapping his fingers. "We're starving over here, let's get some service." Sarah was behind the counter, wiping down the coffee machine. She didn't flinch at the rude tone. She simply finished her task, grabbed her notepad, and limped over to the booth in the corner. "Good afternoon," Sarah said softly. Her voice was raspy, sounding like dry leaves over gravel. "What can I get you boys?" Miller laughed, looking at his friends. "Boys? I don't see any boys here, Grandma. I see warriors. You might want to show a little respect to the uniform." Sarah looked at him. Her face was calm, a mask of stone. "My apologies, Lieutenant. What can I get you?" "I want a steak," Miller said, leaning back and putting his muddy boots up on the seat opposite him. "Rare, and get it here fast. I see you have a bad leg, but try to hustle, okay? The Navy doesn't wait for cripples." The diner went quiet. Old man Jenkins, a Vietnam vet sitting at the counter, lowered his newspaper. Betty, the owner, gasped from the kitchen. Sarah looked at the muddy boots on the clean vinyl seat. Then she looked at Miller. She didn't get angry. She didn't yell. She just wrote down steak rare on her pad. "It will be out in 10 minutes, she said. As she turned to walk away, her bad leg dragged slightly on the linoleum floor. Miller snickered loudly. "Man, look at that. How does someone let themselves go like that? It's pathetic. Imagine having to be served by someone who probably couldn't run a mile to save her life." His friends laughed nervously, but Miller kept going. "That's what happens when you do nothing with your life. You end up wiping tables and limping around." Sarah stopped. She stood still for a moment, her back to them. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a memory. A memory of sand, screaming, and the weight of a sniper rifle in her hands. But she pushed it down. She kept walking. The mission now was just to serve the steak, but the war in Oak Creek was just beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Lieutenant Miller made it his personal mission to torment Sarah. It became a game for him. He and his crew came to the diner almost every day. He seemed personally offended that this quiet, limping woman didn't look at him with the hero worship he felt he deserved. He didn't know that Sarah lived alone in a small cabin near the woods. He didn't know that every morning at 4:00 a.m., despite the pain in her shattered leg, she did 100 push-ups. He didn't know that the junk in her garage was actually a meticulously maintained collection of medals and classified files locked in a safe. One Friday evening, the diner was packed. Sarah was carrying a heavy tray of drinks. Miller stretched his leg out into the aisle on purpose. Sarah saw it, but her bad leg couldn't adjust in time. She tripped. The tray went flying. Sodas and ice crashed onto the floor, splashing onto Miller's uniform. The diner gasped. Sarah hit the ground hard. A sharp pain shot through her hip, the old injury screaming. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Miller jumped up, his face red with rage. "You stupid old woman, look at this. This is a dress uniform." Sarah struggled to her knees. I am sorry, Lieutenant. You had your leg in the aisle." "Don't you blame me for your clumsiness?" Miller shouted. He loomed over her. "You're a hazard. You shouldn't even be working here. You're useless." Betty, the owner, rushed out from the back. "That is enough, Miller. Leave her alone." Miller sneered. "I'm doing you a favor, Betty. Fire this woman. She's a disgrace." Sarah used the table to pull herself up. She wiped her hands on her apron. She looked Miller in the eye. For a split second, the server vanished. Her eyes turned into steel. It was the look of a predator assessing a threat. "Your bootlace is untied, Lieutenant," Sarah said quietly. Miller looked down, confused. His lace was fine. When he looked back up, Sarah was already cleaning the mess. "You listen to me?" Miller hissed, leaning close to her ear. "Next week is the Admiral's gala at the base. I'm bringing my fiancée. If I see you anywhere near that base, if you embarrass me again, I'll make sure you never work in this town again. I have pull." It was a threat against her livelihood. Sarah didn't respond. She just continued mopping the floor. But inside, a fire that had been dormant for 20 years began to burn. She wasn't angry for herself. She was angry that a man wearing the uniform she loved, the uniform she had bled for, had no concept of honor. That night, Sarah went home. She opened her closet, pushed aside the waitress uniforms. In the back, wrapped in plastic, hung a dress blue uniform. It had no rank insignia on the sleeve, but the chest was heavy with ribbons. She touched the fabric gently. "Not yet," she whispered to the empty room. The next day, Betty told Sarah the news. "Sarah, honey, the base hired us for the catering at the gala. Big money, but that Miller boy will be there. Maybe you should take the night off." Sarah shook her head. "No, Betty, we need the money, and I don't run from bullies." "He's a SEAL, Sarah," Betty said worriedly. Sarah smiled, a rare small smile. "He's a boy, Betty, he's just a boy." The Naval Base Gala was the event of the year. The Officers' Club was transformed into a ballroom with crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and a live orchestra. The air was filled with the smell of expensive perfume and polished leather. Admiral Richard Sterling was the guest of honor. Sterling was a living legend in the Navy. He was a massive man with a shaved head and a demeanor that could freeze water. He was the commander of naval special warfare. He didn't like parties. He liked precision. He liked discipline. He stood near the front of the room, surrounded by sycophants and politicians, holding a glass of water. He looked bored. He was scanning the room, his eyes moving constantly, a habit from decades of combat. In the background, the catering staff moved like ghosts. Sarah was among them. She wore a white tuxedo shirt and black slacks. Her limp was noticeable, but she moved with an efficiency that the other servers lacked. She anticipated needs before they were asked. A glass empty, she was there. A napkin dropped, replaced. Lieutenant Miller was there, standing in the center of the room with his fiancée and his group of friends. He was drinking heavily, his voice getting louder. He was retelling stories of his training, embellishing every detail to sound more heroic. "So there I was," Miller bragged, "hell week, freezing cold water. Guys were ringing the bell left and right, quitting, but not me. I'm built different." He spotted Sarah moving through the crowd with a tray of champagne. Miller's eyes narrowed. He excused himself from his group and stepped into her path. "I thought I told you to stay away," he whispered harshly, grabbing her arm. Sarah didn't spill a drop. She looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. "I am doing my job, Lieutenant. Please unhand me." "You're embarrassing me," Miller slurred slightly. "A cripple serving the elite, it's a bad look." "The only one embarrassing the uniform right now is you, Lieutenant," Sarah said. Her voice was low, but it carried a command authority that surprised him. Miller's face turned purple. "How dare you speak to me like that? You're a servant. I am a United States naval officer." He shoved her. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough. Sarah stumbled back. She didn't fall, thanks to her balance, but the tray tipped. 3 glasses of champagne slid off and shattered on the polished floor right in front of the Admiral's table. The sound of breaking glass cut through the music. The orchestra stopped. The entire room went silent. All eyes turned to the scene. Lieutenant Miller stood there looking smug, pointing at Sarah. "Look at this mess," Miller shouted, playing the victim. "This woman is drunk. I tried to steady her and she dropped the tray. Security should throw her out." Sarah stood amidst the broken glass. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She simply grabbed a cloth from her belt and bent down to pick up the shards of glass. She wouldn't let anyone else cut themselves. That was when heavy footsteps approached. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Admiral Sterling walked into the circle. He looked at the broken glass. He looked at Lieutenant Miller. And then he looked down at the gray-haired woman on her knees. The Admiral's presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He was terrifying. "What is the meaning of this?" Admiral Sterling rumbled. His voice was deep and gravelly. Lieutenant Miller snapped to attention, but he was smiling. He thought he had an ally. "Admiral, my apologies, sir. This incompetent caterer caused a scene. She stumbled and nearly spilled drinks on your guests. I was just reprimanding her. I suggest we have her removed." The Admiral looked at Miller with cold, dead eyes. "You suggest?" Miller's smile faltered. "Well, yes, sir, to maintain the dignity of the evening." Admiral Sterling turned his gaze to Sarah. She was still on one knee, carefully picking up the sharp, jagged pieces of glass. She hadn't looked up yet. She was focused on the task. The Admiral, feeling the tension in the room and perhaps wanting to break the ice with a bit of dark humor at the expense of the situation, decided to make a joke. He was known for his dry, biting wit. He looked down at the woman scrubbing the floor. "You there?" the Admiral barked. Sarah paused. "You seem to be seeing a lot of combat down there on the floor," the Admiral said, his voice booming so the whole room could hear. "You handle that rag like a weapon. What's your rank, cleaner? General of the mop, commander of the kitchen." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Lieutenant Miller laughed the loudest. "That's a good one, Admiral, commander of the kitchen." The Admiral waited for the woman to look up, expecting a fearful apology or a nervous smile. Sarah stopped moving. Her hand froze over a piece of glass. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself up. Her bad leg trembled under the strain, but she forced it to lock. She stood up straight. She brushed a stray lock of gray hair from her face. She turned and faced Admiral Sterling. For a moment, there was silence. The Admiral was smiling, waiting for a reaction, but then his eyes locked with hers. Sarah's eyes were a piercing, pale blue. They were eyes that had seen things no human should see. They were eyes that held secrets buried in redacted files. The Admiral's smile began to fade. He squinted. He tilted his head slightly. He knew those eyes. He had seen them in nightmares. He had seen them in the scope of a rifle in a desert 20 years ago. But that was impossible. That person was a myth. That person was dead or gone. Sarah didn't speak at first. She let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then she spoke. Her voice wasn't the raspy whisper of the diner waitress anymore. It was clear, projected from the diaphragm, the voice of an officer. "My rank is irrelevant, Admiral," she said, "but my call sign, you might remember that." The lieutenant scoffed. "Call sign, listen to her, she thinks she's in a movie." "Quiet," the Admiral snapped at Miller, never taking his eyes off Sarah. The Admiral took a step closer, his heart starting to hammer in his chest. "Who are you?" he whispered. Sarah leaned in slightly. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "They used to call me Silent Hawk ****. The effect of those two words was immediate and physical. Admiral Sterling, the man of iron, the man who ate nails for breakfast, took a visible step back. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale. His hands, resting by his sides, began to tremble. The glass of water he was holding slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, mixing with the broken champagne. But he didn't notice. "Hawk," he choked out. "My God, Sarah." The room was confused. Lieutenant Miller looked between them, panic starting to set in. "Admiral, you know this?" "Waitress." The Admiral spun around, his fury erupting like a volcano. "Shut your mouth, Lieutenant. You are speaking of a legend." Sterling turned back to Sarah, his eyes watering. He disregarded protocol. He reached out and grabbed her shoulders, checking if she was real. "We thought you were dead. The mission in Kandahar, 2004. You disappeared. The file was sealed." Sarah smiled sadly. "I didn't die, Richard, but my leg did, and my career, I chose to fade away. It was better for the agency, better for the Navy." Admiral Sterling turned to the room. He looked at the hundreds of shocked faces. He pointed at Sarah, the woman in the catering uniform. "You all see a server," the Admiral announced, his voice shaking with emotion. "I see the reason I am alive today." He took a deep breath to steady himself. 20 years ago, my SEAL team was pinned down in a valley. We were outnumbered 50-1. We were out of ammo. We were saying our last prayers. We had no air support, no extraction. The Admiral paused, looking at Sarah with reverence. Then the shots started, from the ridges, single shots, one every 2 seconds, silent, deadly. Someone was up there holding back an entire battalion alone. For 6 hours, she provided overwatch. She took a bullet to the hip and kept firing. She dragged herself 3 miles to pull me out of the line of fire when I was hit. The Admiral touched the scar on his own cheek. She is the first female sniper ever attached to the Tier 1 operator units. Classified, strictly off the books. Her code name was Silent Hawk. She is the greatest marksman this country has ever produced. The Admiral looked at Lieutenant Miller, who was now trembling himself, sweat pouring down his face. "And you," the Admiral said to Miller, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You mocked her, you shoved her, you judged her by her limp. That limp is the price she paid for my life." Miller tried to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Sarah, the slow lady from the diner. He suddenly saw the predator in her eyes. He realized the clumsiness was an act, or a result of injuries sustained in heroism he couldn't comprehend. Sarah looked at the Admiral. "It's okay, Richard. I didn't do it for the fame. I did it for the brothers." "Well, you're going to get the fame now," Sterling said. Slowly, deliberately, the Admiral straightened his uniform. He stepped back 3 paces. He stood rigid. And then the Admiral of the Navy slowly raised his hand and executed a sharp, crisp salute to the catering lady. It started slowly. The old veterans in the room stood up, then the other officers. Within 30 seconds, the entire ballroom was standing, hundreds of people saluting the woman in the stained white shirt. Sarah stood tall. She returned the salute, her hand cutting the air with perfect military precision. The fallout was swift. The next morning, the story of the Silent Hawk wasn't just base gossip, it was headline news. Admiral Sterling had declassified her file. The world learned about Master Chief Sarah Vance, the ghost warrior who had saved dozens of lives. But for Lieutenant Miller, the morning brought a different kind of news. He was summoned to the Admiral's office at 600 hours. He stood before the desk, sweating, his arrogance completely gone. Admiral Sterling didn't yell. That would have been too easy. He simply pushed a piece of paper across the desk. "You have disgraced your trident, son," Sterling said quietly. "The Navy requires warriors, not bullies. A true leader recognizes strength in others, regardless of their station. You failed the most basic test of character." Miller looked at the paper. It was a transfer order. "Adak, Alaska," Miller read, his voice cracking. "Listening post duty." "It's a quiet place," Sterling said. "Plenty of time to think about humility. You'll be scrubbing floors there for a while. Maybe you'll learn to respect the general of the mop." "Dismissed." Miller walked out, his career in Special Forces over before it had truly begun. Back in Oak Creek, the Bluebird Diner was busier than ever, but things had changed. Sarah still worked there. She refused to quit. She said she liked the busy mornings, but now when she walked to a table, people stood up. One sunny afternoon, a few weeks after the gala, Sarah was wiping down the counter. The door opened. It was Admiral Sterling. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. He sat at the counter. "Coffee?" Sarah asked, grabbing the pot. "Please," Sterling said. He watched her pour. "You know, Sarah, the Pentagon wants to give you the Medal of Honor, retroactively. The paperwork is already on the president's desk." Sarah paused. She looked out the window at the small town she called home. "I don't need a medal, Richard. I have my peace." "You earned it," Sterling insisted. "And we need an instructor at the advanced sniper school. We need someone to teach the new generation not just how to shoot, but how to be humble, how to be strong." Sarah looked at her bad leg. Then she looked at the Admiral. "I can't run, Richard." "We don't need you to run," the Admiral smiled. "We need you to teach them how to fly." Sarah Vance, the Silent Hawk, placed the coffee pot down. She untied her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the counter. "I'll start on Monday," she said. The Admiral nodded, raised his coffee cup in a toast, and drank. Outside, the wind blew through the trees of Oak Creek, no longer whispering, but singing the song of a hero who finally got her due.